Why don't stay at Airbnb anymore? 2017 was the last year my family went on our yearly ski trip. It was a family tradition and one of the few times I'd see some of my siblings, as most of them are all much older than me and have lives of their own. I remember my mom suggesting we'd stay at an Airbnb that year, as it was cheaper and not far from the ski hill, and we all thought that was a great idea. So my mom, my dad, my younger brother Jackson, and I piled into the car to meet my older brother, Isaac, and my older sister Megan, and her husband Drew. I was so excited to see them. Jackson and I jumped out of the car the second we arrived, eagerly looking forward to picking our shared room. "Race ya," Jackson screamed, while barreling ahead of me. "Hey, no fair," I laughed, chasing him, but just barely keeping up. He pointed to a room on the top floor and motioned for me to follow him to it. I followed him to the room. It was amazing. It had a big loft with our beds on it, and a huge TV. Plus, there was a giant window on the loft level. "This place is awesome," Jackson shouted while climbing up the ladder to the loft. I followed and peered out the window into the enchanting winter forest just behind the cabin. I had the feeling this trip was going to be amazing. I was wrong. A few hours after we arrived, my 18-year-old brother Isaac came. He marveled at the cabin's beauty and charm, and so did Megan and Drew when they arrived. The first few days were great. We all drove to the ski hill together. My dad would take us boys skiing, while my mom and sister relaxed in the lodge, since my sister was pregnant with my first nephew at the time. It was on the third night that something strange began to happen. I woke up at around 2 in the morning to the sound of sticks or something being thrown at the huge window in Jackson and his room. I sat awake and listened for a few moments, staring at the window, even though there was a thin curtain covering the window. The light from the moon allowed me to watch the silhouettes of the sticks hitting the window. They weren't big, they were thin and small, but big enough to make a distinct tapping noise every time they hit. Tap, tap, tap. "Dylan," Jackson called tiredly, "stop with that noise." "It's not me, Loke," I shouted to him while pointing to the window. Now he was watching the sticks hit the window. "What is that?" he whispered. "Let's find out," I whispered while creeping out of bed. I turned back to see if Jackson was following me. He hesitated, but curiosity overcame him, and he crept after me. I rolled the curtains up and gazed down into the darkness. I couldn't see anything despite the big bright moon, just a stick being tossed from the darkness below and hitting the window every few seconds. Jackson and I opened the window. The stick tossing ceased. "Hello," Jackson called. For a few moments it was quiet, but then someone responded. "Hey, Jackson." "Hey, Dylan," the voice called. I recognized it immediately. It was Drew. Drew has a very thick Australian accent, as he lived there most his life, so it wasn't very hard to conclude it was just Drew pranking us. "Funny prank, Drew," Jackson said playfully. Then he closed the window and climbed back into bed. "Isn't that kind of weird?" I asked Jackson. "Hey, he's just playing around," Jackson replied nonchalantly. I agreed and went back to sleep. The next day was normal. Drew didn't mention anything about the prank, but it was in the back of my mind now. However, that night I was awoken again by the same tapping on the window. At the same time as the night before, I immediately looked over at Jackson. We both got up and opened the window again. All I saw was darkness, but this time I could hear Drew giggling. "Hey, Drew," I said, a bit aggravated. "Guys," Drew said between giggles, "come out here." Jackson and I exchanged glances. "We can't, Mom and Dad will get mad." Drew's giggling stopped. His tone got urgent and serious quickly. "You gotta see this. Come down here." "No," I said. "Come down here." Drew screamed angrily. A rock flew from the darkness. It just barely hit me. It fell through the window onto the floor. Jackson and I looked at each other in fear. Normally Drew was a polite and calm guy, has always been kind and loving towards Jackson and I. He never raised his voice. He never took things too far. I knew him as a voice of reason, and he had become even calmer after learning he was going to have a baby. "I'm getting Megan," Jackson cried. He rushed away. Drew's screams grew louder and more aggressive. "Get out here now," Drew screamed louder than ever. I fell to my knees and balled up on the floor in terror, while tears flowed out my eyes. That's when I heard Jackson come running into the room with Megan. "Dylan, come down here now," Megan called from below the loft. Quickly I went down the ladder and ran into my sister's arms. Drew was still screaming from outside. I had my eyes closed while my sister hugged me. When I opened them, I realized the terrifying truth. Drew was standing right there. But who was currently standing outside our cabin screaming then? The person was still screaming for Jackson, and thoughts swarmed my mind. Who was out there? How did it know my name? And why did it sound just like Drew? We all stood in fearful silence. The voice stopped. But then a huge jagged rock as big as my head flew through the window, off the loft and straight at my sister. Her real husband pulled her back quickly. She still screamed at the top of her lungs, which made my parents and Isaac rush into the room. They comforted my sister, and that's when I noticed this humanoid thing climbing through the still open window. I screamed while everyone else began noticing it. That's when we all booked it to the car. Everyone piled in my parents' car, and we left the other cars behind. My mom was on the phone with the police for a lot of the drive. They searched the whole house and woods outside the house, to no avail. It's been years since that happened. The baby my sister was pregnant with is in school now. But I still wake up in a cold sweat at night, thinking I heard a voice call me and tell me, "Dylan, come out here." Story 2. I think I may die in this Airbnb. I don't know where my friends are. I don't even know where I am. None of us would have been able to afford this on our own. Even with 5 of us, it was still pricey. But, to be fair, it was one hell of a house. It was 3 stories, with dark scalloped siding. Paul had grown up in the area and had found the place. He'd heard all sorts of things about the place being haunted, and some of the dark history growing up, but it hadn't been open to the public back then. The house was beautiful, yes, but in a foreboding sort of way. The dark wood and stained glass windows meant that very little light truly filtered in, even in the peak daylight hours. The old floorboards protested our friends' steps as they explored the house. A door off to the side of the kitchen caught my attention, and I found myself drawn to it. Inside was a staircase. It was narrow and incredibly steep. You could only see a few steps before it rose out of our sight completely. It looked old and, to be honest, terrifying. "Sebekti, Aida, want to join the tour?" Paul shouted down to us. The house was large enough for each of us to have our own room. I wasn't excited about that. The last thing my overactive imagination and I needed were a giant room for myself. I turned on my phone and listened to some music to drown it out. It sounded like it was moaning now. I turned the music up louder, covered my head with a blanket. I burrowed my headphones into my ears deep enough to cause future hearing loss. If you can't hear it, it can't hurt you, right? Somehow I did manage to fall asleep. I asked the others if they had had any odd experiences. It was just me. Paul looked excited. He had lots of questions. He truly was hoping the house was haunted. I just told him I heard footsteps. He mentioned how he believed that enough suffering could result in opening a door and letting something in. "So you do think it's haunted?" Diane asked, her green eyes wide. She had been hanging on to the man's every word. "Well, I always thought haunted implied that a human passed on, but never left." He scratched his chin, leaned in for effect. "But I don't think what walks those halls was ever human." His words hovered over me the rest of the day like a dark cloud. I turned music on again. I woke up around midnight and the album had ended, but luckily so had the disturbing sounds from upstairs. I heard voices coming from the living room area and figured I'd see if my friends were also being kept up too. There wasn't anyone there. It wasn't like I had just missed them in this house. The creaky floor would have indicated their movement. I tried to quietly slide back to my room, my socks gliding across the smooth wooden floors. Not too long after I had closed the door, someone gently rapped their knuckles on my door. It was as if they had been steps behind me the whole time. But why hadn't I heard them then? "Can I come in?" Katie whispered. I was so relieved the house was really getting to me, and I was grateful for the company. Before I could even answer, she repeated herself in a more sing-songy voice. "Can I come in? I want to show you something." She called out my name, but struggled to pronounce it. Like she'd never said it before. I froze. Sure, my name may not be all that common here, but we'd known each other for a decade. She always pronounced it with ease. I would still pay my portion, of course, but I was going to be staying in town tomorrow night. I smiled to myself at the thought. Yep, staying in town tomorrow. In a hotel? I'd have to use some of my savings, but it'd be worth it. The next morning, Paul stared at me, transfixed. Hey, he leaned towards me. "What was up with you last night? You came to my door. You kept trying to get me to come to the basement with you. Remember, I had never gone to Paul's room. I was too busy with my own ordeal." Aida and Diane had similar stories. When they came down, one of us came to their room and said something along the lines of, "Have you seen the basement yet? Let me show you," and tried to lead them down there. Aida stared at me, her face grim. As for Katie, well, she never came to breakfast at all. We had plans, and when by noon Katie still hadn't come downstairs, I volunteered to check on her. I ascended the stairs, taking in the unique features of the house. "I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to you, but Katie wasn't in her room. I heard steps above me on the third floor. I was much braver in the light of day, so I ascended the second flight of stairs and went room to room on the third floor. No one was there, but it was cold, much colder than the second or first floors. I went back to the second floor, trying to fight the urge to glance over my shoulder. I paused in front of the door of the room above mine where Idy heard the crawling and mournful wail. The past 2 nights I considered it for a moment and decided to open it. It was locked. Part of me was relieved. While I was upstairs, our friends had checked around the grounds. The only places they hadn't checked was the basement and whatever was up the stairs in the kitchen. Story 3. We had regrouped in the kitchen and stared at the dark, steep stairs. Paul said he'd check the basement. If one of us could please take the kitchen stairs, the tight space made him nervous, he said. It seemed like a fair trade. After a moment of awkward silence, Diane volunteered. To my immense relief, she was also the smallest of us, at a petite 51. Even then, she still had to crawl on her hands and knees to ascend the stairs. We waited, heard her walk around above us, calling out for Katie. She was up there for a while. It sounded like the space was massive. My stomach dropped as I realized I heard 2 pairs of footsteps, one above my head and another further into the kitchen, but moving towards the person above me. Diane? I hissed up the stairs. Frantically, no answer. I took a deep breath and prepared to ascend after her. Just as I had crawled up about 3 steps, someone moved to stand at the top, blocking the already limited light. "We're coming," Diane whispered. She had begun to crawl towards me, descending the steep stairs, facing me, but on her hands and knees her arms looked long, too long. In order to allow her to do so, she propelled herself towards me using those long, thin limbs. Her eyes glinted at me in the dim light. I yelped and took a backwards leap and nearly hit my head on the doorframe. I instinctively stood behind the tallest person in the kitchen, Aida, who had a couple of inches on me. Diane emerged. She was walking like a normal bipedal person. I must have imagined what I saw in the darkness. "Well," Paul asked, "was Katie up there?" Diane cracked her neck on each side, stared and smiled at each of us, like she was taking in each of our faces for the first time. She shook her head slowly. She gave me a smile unlike the one she flashed at Paul and Aida. She winked at me. She smelled of old things. She looked disheveled and walked stiffly. We looked around. The thing is, there was no door to the basement that we could find. Aida sent what we hoped was a nonchalant message that we all crafted together to the host, asking them where the basement was. We received the unsettling reply immediately. "There is no basement." Paul laughed at that. Diane smiled dreamily and stared up at the stained glass skylight. It was like she was in her own world ever since her stint up the small stairs. Aida and I looked at each other nervously. We went into town to see if anyone had seen Katie, and spent the rest of the day searching for her. We sat together in silence. The large living room felt emptier. With Katie missing, we stared at a pizza that none of us felt like eating. Looked like I was spending the night here again after all. I locked my door that night. Round what had become the usual time, I heard the wet, dragging, crawling sounds upstairs. I tried to not picture what the thing making the sounds must look like. At home, I always slept with a weighted blanket on me. It made me feel safe. With just the thin sheet and old quilt, I couldn't help but feel exposed here. Around 3 a.m., I woke to moaning and scraping outside my door. "I need your help." I tried to place the voice. It was low, but sounded female. It wasn't Aida. It wasn't Katie. It didn't sound like Diane. "It's me, Diane." I didn't reply. The cadence was also odd. The doorknob turned quickly, aggressively. I tried to remain silent. motionless. I need your help. My skin, it's too tight. It doesn't fit. I sat up against the headboard with my hands over my mouth, focusing on breathing as quietly as possible as it pounded at the door. Eventually, the steps faded away. The next morning, Aida looked happy. She was practically beaming. I realized that she looked different. Aida always wore her meticulously applied cat eye eyeliner and her purple lipstick, but this morning she had no makeup on. Her blue-black hair looked odd. Her bangs that were usually carefully styled and ended in a delicate point between her brows were hastily brushed off to one side. I had always admired how she presented herself and wished I had the skill and patience. She did look bad this morning, but she did look like herself either. Diane and Paul hadn't come down. "I'm going to go look for the others," I whispered. "You should look up there," Aida whispered, in the same husky foreign voice that I heard last night outside my door. She pointed to the kitchen stairs. I felt my throat tighten. No. I shook my head quickly. She responded with a smile. I half expected her to leap at me or follow me on my search for Paul and Diane. She didn't. Instead, she crawled back up those narrow, thin, nightmare stairs, showing the same oddly proportioned dexterity that Diane had demonstrated the day before. I knocked on Paul's door nervously. It was also locked. I continued to knock until he came to the door, groggy. He seemed mildly annoyed at the intrusion. He blocked the view into his room with his body. When I told him I couldn't find Diane, he told me he'd meet me downstairs. Diane was nowhere to be found. Aida had yet to come back down from the room above the kitchen. I could hear tearing and wet chewing sounds coming from up the stairs. I locked the door wordlessly. I tried to fight back the bile rising in my throat. I tried to tell Paul we needed to leave while it was still daylight. I didn't want to leave our friends either, but we needed to come back with more people because something terrible was going on. We were outmatched. We were probably outnumbered. Paul tried to convince me to stay. Surely there was an explanation. We couldn't take the car and leave our friends here. He looked at me accusingly. I loved our friends, too, but I wasn't going to spend another night in this place. I thought of the crawler upstairs behind its locked door, dragging its heavy body across the floor, like wet meat crying out in the darkness for who knows what. I thought of Diane's odd behavior and subsequent disappearance. I thought of Katie, who had a crush on Paul. If she heard his voice outside her door, I'm sure she would have followed him. I thought of the thing that was likely wearing Aida's skin, eating something myceli upstairs. I vaguely wondered if Paul and I were the only ones left. I told Paul the first was leaving. As I was packing up, I felt a sharp blow, and everything went dark. I woke up in the basement. Turns out there was a basement after all. Katie was down here too. She seemed to be pinned to the wall by her wrists. Her eyes were glassy. She stared ahead, and blinking, pale. "Katie," I hissed at her. She weakly turned her head to me. She was wearing the same clothes she had on 2 days ago. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. I was just relieved she was alive. I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Paul. He was carrying an ice chest and a satchel of tools. I had never been happier to see him. He came to me, squatted by me, and patted me on the head like I was a child, beaming, while he fiddled with the tools, selecting something long and sharp-looking. I shifted and positioned my legs beneath me. As Paul approached me, I sprung up and ran towards him. hitting him hard with my shoulder. It seemed to take him by surprise, and I took advantage of his momentary confusion to pick up the ice chest the only way I could, with my hands bound by one handle, and swung it at him. I ran up the stairs, and my heart sunk when I found I was in a part of the house I had never seen before. It looked older, lacked the meticulous care applied to restoring and cleaning the rest of the place. I've called the police. All I can do now is wait and hope I can either get one of the sealed windows open, or the police find me before Paul or one of the other residents do. I closed my Airbnb this week, but they're still finding victims. To anyone wanting to start one, I recommend getting background checks done. I know it's not ideal. In fact, it'll probably push a lot of business away, but you have no idea who might be using your property for their own malicious activities, especially if the customer contacting you uses Airbnb all the time and is rated extremely well. It might just be because they work very hard at being a good customer, earning positive credits, and leaving good impression so renters won't suspect anything. It all started a couple of years ago when an elderly gentleman requested the use of my cabin for the weekend. He had been a member of the app since nearly his start. Everything about his profile and message to me was very sweet. A retired lawyer traveling the country using Airbnb. He mentioned in his profile that he liked to do woodworking. During his stay, he'd build small things like birdhouses, wooden fixtures, or knickknacks as a hobby. He even acknowledged it in his message, saying he was very clean and would remove any wood dust or shavings, but noted that if I didn't want him doing it, he would understand and just enjoy his stay at the cabin. I told him it was fine so long as he cleaned up, and he didn't disappoint. Though I never heard him make anything or use tools. He stayed for the weekend and pretty much deep-cleaned the entire cabin. I felt almost embarrassed. It was cleaner than any customer, or I for that matter, had ever left it. He used the cabin more than once, maybe 10 times in the last 2 years. We only spoke a few times, but he seemed nice. He was always gone before I was awake on checkout day. I'd know he'd laughed when his covered truck would be gone. I only heard him use a power tool on his first stay, a saw or perhaps a drill, but never again after that. I would see him carrying paint to and from the truck now and then, slept during the day, did his hobbies at night, and he'd always leave a generous review, detailing the view of the lake and the comfort of the cabin. Quiet guy, but was always a guaranteed 5-star review and free cleaning. He always mentioned how pretty the lake was. It's beautiful, Lucy, and you don't ruin it with boating or swimming. It's perfect instead of disrupting such a peaceful area with my sawing and drilling. I use my time here to paint what projects I already have done. That we could agree. The lake was special to me. It wasn't very big, not for boats at least, and the algae kept people from swimming in it, and I liked that. It was untouched by human invasion and was most naturally vibrant. I could stare at it for hours. I decided not to keep it to myself and open this small cabin beside it as an Airbnb so everyone could enjoy it. When people are here, I'm sure to let them know they don't have to be a stranger and can come say hi, but I'll leave them alone in case they just want a private getaway. I'll get couples on vacation or honeymoon, a single person just trying to get away from it all and on occasion, a few 20-somethings wanting to party. It was business as usual until a girl staying by herself one weekend told me she heard something in the cabin. It was strange, and I don't mean to be rude, but it sounded like a shuddering noise, like a camera. I was immediately taken aback. I have no cameras or security besides locks on the door and windows. So we went down there together. We checked every inch of the small cabin and even stood in silence, waiting for the sound to happen again. No cameras shuddering or lenses flashing, but I reassured her I would never spy on people and offered a partial reimbursement for her discomfort. She seemed to believe me and apologized, unsure if she had heard anything at all. Then suddenly, at about 2 in the morning, she left. I checked the cabin in the morning, but everything seemed fine. I expected a horrible review the following week, but no review was posted. Instead, what I saw was worse. Her name in the newspaper a week later. She was reported missing. An interview with the police and her father stated that she went missing on May 7th, a week after her stay at my cabin. She called me up after leaving a cabin she rented last weekend, said she felt like she was being watched. We talked about it. Thought maybe she might be smoking too much of the green stuff, but called me a day or so later and said she still felt like someone was watching her at her apartment. Now, I told her she could come stay with us, but she said she'd be fine. Then I didn't hear from her for a while, and when I went to go check on her, the apartment was empty. The article continued to detail how the door was forced open, and signs of struggle showed a clear kidnapping. My hands trembled, the newspaper in front of me. Our small town never received news like this. I set the paper down and started to brew a pot of tea, praying they would find that sweet girl. I took the steaming cup of tea down to the cabin and sat on a bench by the lake. I glared at the cabin, wondering if I should go look around. I think the article really got to me. I thought about finishing the rest of the newspaper, but I feared it would make me sick to see that headline again. I looked over the water instead, taking in the view of the small lake and surrounding forest. No one besides me knew, but when the morning sun hit the water just right, you could see right through to the bottom of the lake. A collection of beautiful reflective rocks would shine the dancing light back to the surface. It's what drew me to buy the property in the first place. It was so peaceful. Over the next dozen months, tenants came and left, but the cases of missing persons grew. I couldn't believe my eyes. Our small forest community was having a real issue. 13 people went missing from our area. I began to take matters into my own hands and messaged a collection of Airbnb renters in town. Maybe I was being a nosy neighbor with too much time on their hands, but I thought someone might have seen something. I started a conversation on Messenger with everyone, but no one had anything to report. The last people to use my cabin were a group of college kids spending the weekend partying. They were a bit loud, playing music I didn't understand and shouting all sorts of things, but I gave no complaint. Sometimes a quiet place needs a bit of excitement to better appreciate its normally peaceful setting. I woke the next morning and sat on my porch, steam rolling off a cup of tea cusp in my hands. The cabin was quiet and a couple of tents were pitched outside. A few loose red cups lay scattered by the fire pit. The sun was just beginning to rise over the trees. Chelsea, I jumped in my seat, spilling hot tea on my lap. One of the boys walked out of the forest, visibly disheveled and panicking. I stood wiping off my pants and called out to him, "Hey, everything okay? I run the Airbnb here. You kids all right?" No, we can't find her." My heart sunk. A chilling tone escaped his exhausted breath. He must have been looking in the woods for several minutes, if not hours. Another guy stepped out from the brush opposite, further down the driveway. "Anything?" "Matt, no man. We should call the police or something. It's been way too long." I rushed into the house and grabbed my phone. Dialing 911, I walked back onto the porch and was promptly greeted by the two young men. "Hey, where is she? We've heard people have gone missing here. Is she inside?" I shook my head, startled, and stood aside, letting the frustrated young man into my home. The operator answered, and I told her my address and what had happened. From inside I could hear things being moved around, between shouts for Chelsea. The other kid on my porch apologized for his friend's behavior. From the cabin walked up a girl, holding a phone to her ear. "Jake, I'm calling the police. It's been like 3 hours and I'm getting super worried." Her voice quivered. Jake gestured to the girl to come up to the porch and pointed at me. "She's already calling the police. Let's just calm Matt down. He's starting to freak out." After speaking to the operator, I hung up the phone and asked the kids to come inside and tell me what had happened. We stepped in and the angrier one, Matt, saw his friends and relaxed a bit. I put on some tea, and they explained they heard some noises from Chelsea's tent at around 2 or 3 in the morning. They assumed she had gotten up to grab something from the car or use the restroom inside the cabin, but when she never returned, they checked the tent. It was left open and things didn't look right. It was a mess. All the blankets were tossed and things were scattered. The two sleeping in the cabin said they never heard her come in. The cops arrived and the kids talked them through everything. It was then that I learned that Matt's cousin had been added to the missing list a few months ago. A girl on the other side of town, taken right from her campus dorm. His friends told him everything would be okay, that this camping trip would be good for him. I helped the best I could, but I didn't know what else to do. Officers walked the perimeter of my land, checking every tree, hole, and hill. An officer dressed in waders walked into the lake, skimming the surface and under algae for any sign of Chelsea. When the police asked for security footage, I told them I don't have any cameras on the premises. I've never had to before. Our community wasn't like that. You're right, it wasn't. But it is now, the officer said. Once the news got out, and the rather unflattering review from the kids was posted, my cabin became quite unappealing. I looked back at the group chat that night with the other Airbnb owners, and they were all abuzz. It was like they forgot I was the one who started the group chat in the first place. I can't believe it. If that were my place, it'd be finished. Do you think she did it? The owner? Oh my God, could you imagine? Do you think she did it? Really, I was mortified. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I quickly typed a message. "Hey, guys, Lucy here. I can't believe what happened either. I'm still in shock myself, and I hope they find that girl." Post. The thread went silent. I could see chat bubbles begin typing, then stop. One by one the profile bubbles dropped down, showing that people had seen my comment, but no one said anything. Overwhelmed, I put the phone down and cried. I couldn't imagine how people might think I'd do something like that. It took nearly the whole night to calm myself down. I had to remember that I never met those other owners before, and they don't know me either. It's just a scary news headline, a worried community, and the fact that I started the group chat, and that girl was taken here at my cabin. I didn't look at my phone for the rest of the night. I had a cup of tea and went to bed. A couple of weeks went by and not one person was interested in renting the cabin. I couldn't blame them. Who would want to stay at a cabin where someone went missing? Except the old man. I did ask him if he heard what happened. I just left him alone to tend to his hobbies until night, when I was woken by his truck. The sound of an engine having sprang me out of sleep, and when I looked out the window, I saw he had gotten stuck trying to go around the lake. I was so confused and kind of upset. I ran outside and yelled at him, a bit assertively, what he thought was doing driving all over the mud and grass. He slammed the gas, forcing his truck out of the dirt, and drove toward the house. Stopping at the driveway, I stormed up to his truck, but stepped back when he shouted from his window, "Mind your own business, you old bag, before I make you take a dunk in the lake." He peeled off and raced down the driveway. A nearly 6-foot stitched bag used for collecting wood dust flew from the flailing rear of the truck. I watched as he left, then quickly went inside. I told the police what had happened, but since he didn't damage anything or hurt anyone, they focused their attention on the missing people. They asked if I wanted a squad car sent out, but they were right. I'd rather have them trying to find those poor girls. I checked the cabin. It seemed fine, besides tire tracks all over the yard. So I went back inside and tried to relax. But my thoughts spiraled. Anxiety took the best of me, and I paced around the house. I needed to calm down, so I walked down to the lake. Sitting on the bench without a cup of tea, I watched the sunrise. I knew these woods inside and out. I grew up in this area all my life. I hated whoever was doing this to our community, to my community, to my land, lake, and my cabin. The cabin and lake that I wasn't ready to say I don't feel safe in anymore. I tucked my head into my hands and cried. It was true. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't feel safe. I walked back to the house, defeated, picking up the phone. My mind wandered trying to think of the name of the realtor who sold me the house. When I noticed the group chat had blown up, someone else went missing, and at an Airbnb in town. The owner, Michelle, explained that a couple was staying in on the second night someone broke in. The husband was murdered, and the wife was taken, but police had a lead this time. After checking the small rental, they found something in the bedroom. I never noticed it before, so I pointed it out to the cops, and they just cracked it open. Inside a wooden bookend placed on a shelf in the living room was a small camera and mic. The only reason they found it was because the owner didn't recognize the decorative piece. The cops asked her for a list of past tenants, and since she was a new renter of about 5 months, she only had 13 visits. But one guy stood out, an elderly gentleman who liked to do woodworking. He said he just makes random things while staying, so I didn't think anything of it when I heard him working on something. Everyone started to comment. I had a guy like that. He was quiet and very nice. He, retired lawyer, right? He cleaned the whole place for like 3 hours before he left. It was weird. Retired, yeah, but he said he was a doctor, not a lawyer. Guys, I don't remember putting this up in my rental. After so many comments and connecting stories, someone posted a picture, a birdhouse on a tree, facing the bedroom window of their rental. Countless comments rolled in pleading them to either call the police or just open the birdhouse. The owner posted another picture, and all the chat bubbles stopped. No one commented anything, and we all stared at our phones in disbelief. A camera inside the birdhouse, not obvious either, but planted in a hidden compartment in the bottom, so birds could still nest, disguising it better. A cold feeling rushed over me, as I'm sure it did with everyone in the thread. I broke the silence, demanding everyone's urgency. Listen up. Everyone go and check your properties right now. Light fixtures, ornaments, pictures, and anything wooden. If you see something out of place, bring it to the police station. He'll meet everyone there in an hour. All the chat bubbles dropped to my comment, and I slammed my phone on the coffee table. I ran out to my property and began tearing it apart. I couldn't find anything, and I even broke multiple furnishings in the process. I was confident I had bought everything in there, but just to be sure I broke all of it. An hour passed and I decided to head to the police station. I walked past a small gathering of people holding knickknacks, clocks, and just small cameras in general. Everyone had been bugged. The police connected every Airbnb owner, the elderly man. We all had him as a tenant. Every single Airbnb owner in our small community had been visited by this man. None of us could believe it. We exchanged looks, information, and greetings. We all felt connected by this occurrence, and our group chat was a bonding of support. I told them how I never found anything, and so a few came by to help me look. But still, we found nothing. The police informed us later that the old man was using a fake name. They never found any information on him or his whereabouts. He must travel the country doing this kind of stuff. He would listen in on people, on girls he liked, and if they mentioned their address, or when they would be alone while talking to someone on the phone or something, he'd make note of it. Then he'd stop by while they were sleeping and take them. The police said he got so confident or crazy that he started showing up even when other people were around, like he did with my cabin or Michelle's, where he murdered someone. The police told us they would put out a nationwide search for the man and any name he used. As for our Airbnb community, it was done for. No one wanted to stay in a town where a bunch of people went missing, but all became friends and continued conversation on the group chat. The only thing we couldn't understand is why he never left something at my place, or why he only visited my cabin multiple times. It's been a couple of months since then. As for the cabin, I took it off Airbnb, then tore it down. I wanted to inspect every inch for some sort of listening device, but found nothing. Nothing struck me as weird until I started taking down the cabin's structure. There was a gap in the walls between the bathroom and the bedroom. It was large enough that a person could fit what was used for maintaining pipes and wires running throughout the cabin. What was strange about it was a 3-foot-tall cutout on the outside of the cabin leading into the maintenance gap. You wouldn't know unless you push on exactly the right spot, as it was cut with precision and hidden on purpose. Someone had been in there making it accessible to come and go as they please. A small box for sitting, particles of food littering the floor, and a thin hand saw set on a wooden joint. He must have used this to make the hole, carefully and quietly, so as not to raise suspicion. And on either side of the walls were makeshift peepholes that would discreetly open into the bathroom or living room, just large enough for an eye or a camera. I had an officer come out to see the hidden compartment and add it to the case file. I also updated the group chat with pictures so people could look out for the same thing. Then I tore down the remainder of the cabin. Once the last board dropped, I moved the bench to the other side of the lake so I could take in a different view. It wasn't much, but it helped me forget what happened here, even if for a moment I wasn't going to let this ruin my lake. My home, the beauty and calmness of this body of water would never be tarnished. So I walked a little further with my cup of hot tea and sat beside the lake. I waited patiently as the sun rose over the lush trees. A blanket draped over my cold shoulders, I felt the warmth of the sun kiss my face, and was reassured that the lake would make me smile once again. The sun washed over the water's surface, and the bottom of the lake unveiled itself. Dozens of beautiful rocks glistened a rainbow of lights at me, and multiple bags of a similar color to the rocks obstructed the vibrant colors. The fabric of the bags were crudely painted to blend in with the rocks, making them hardly noticeable. From this side of the lake, when the light hit just right, you couldn't miss them. My tea grew cold as I stared for what felt like hours at my beautiful lake, filled with the bodies of missing people from our community. Story 4. And never using Airbnb again. I decided to treat my wife to a vacation for her birthday. We don't have kids, have a moderately stable income, and love to travel. She told me to surprise her. She only had one requirement: hot tub. Well, finding a place within 2 weeks on Airbnb with a hot tub seemed to prove its own challenges. I checked Savannah, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Virginia. Then I thought to myself, Tennessee, the Great Smoky Mountains. All those cabins always have a hot tub. So I went ahead and did a search on Airbnb and found a place with damn near perfect reviews. A few for stars here or there, but no complaints. I booked it while at work and kept it a secret until we drove there. We arrived and passed through a beautiful gate. We drove up a driveway that was 2 miles long. It took us roughly 15 minutes to do that because of all the blind curves. When we punched in the code and walked in, we fell in love. The place was absolutely gorgeous. I plopped down on the couch and took off my shoes while she went to use the restroom before we dipped in the hot tub. I reached for the TV remote and noticed a paper under it. I figured it was a tub guide or something, but it wasn't. Greetings, guest. We hope you enjoy your stay in this cabin. For the best possible experience, please follow these rules closely. We ask this to ensure your safety and survival. What? Please step inside before midnight. Under no circumstance do you walk outside. Be sure all doors are locked. If the man in the hood approaches, speak to him only if he speaks to you first. Don't leave food outside. Cabins normally say this because bears, but ... you don't want to feed them. Before you leave in the morning, please leave us a positive review. Doing this will give you the code to leave the gate in the morning. I didn't tell my wife because, well, ... she is a scaredy cat. I didn't want to upset her, and I kind of figure It was some joke housekeeping left. Still, am a pretty paranoid person. We hopped in the hot tub and have a couple beers, and I must say, it felt amazing, being but naked in warm water staring out at the moon and stars over the mountain made me feel serenity. But I noticed it was 10 till midnight. Not trying to scare my wife, I asked her if we could go inside and make some cookies before putting on a movie. As we walked in, I locked the back door and casually checked the front. We baked the chocolate chip cookies and put on some kung fu movie before she fell asleep on me. I was on the border of slipping into sleep when I heard knock, knock, knock. I walked up to the door and peered out the side window. "Mr. Bowles, I know you're in there. Please let's have a chat." "Aren't you going to answer, Mr. Boyles? I can smell you through the door and I can see your shadow casting through the window." I finally made sense of what was knocking, and it was a very pale man in a dark robe. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see his cracked old mouth. "Well, what do you want from me?" "Ah, Mr. Boyles, how very smart of you to answer back. Am not really much for small talk, so let me cut to the point. Am very hungry, and so are my children. May we come in?" "No, sir, you cannot." "Oh, what a shame. How about you search in the freezer and give me some of that hamburger meat the owners left?" "Okay, 1 second. You'll leave me alone after this?" I asked. "You have my word. You can even slide the tray through the mail slot." I walked up to the fridge and opened the freezer door. A note was in there with no meat. "If you want to keep your hand, do not slide him any food." "Oh, no." I walked back and told him I had nothing for him. "Tisk, tisk, Mr. Bowles." The hooded man walked away, and my wife woke up and asked why I was so pale. Before I could think of a lie, the chanting started. I peeked out of the window and saw what seemed to be about 8 smaller hooded men. They were circling our cabin and chanting. I couldn't make it out because I was shaking so hard. "Mr. Bowles, am back. I brought company. Kindly open the door, and this can all end." All of them started pounding on windows and doors. My wife was crying hysterically. My senses overloaded. I grabbed the handgun I laid on the nightstand and put it against my head. I just wanted it to stop. All the noise, I was hypnotized. Right before I pulled the trigger, all the little men did a high-pitched scream. I fired the round after my hand jerked, and it went through the TV and was stopped by the chimney. My wife had tackled me and covered my ears. She knew how bad noises bothered me and wrapped a blanket around us both. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember the sun teeing up, and I saw where mud footprints were stomped all over the car. I wrote a positive review and received the code to leave. So if anyone here is planning on going to the Great Smoky Mountains, be wary of the hooded man. Story 5. I paid $3,000 to stay at a premium Airbnb for a week. I really should have read the reviews. I stood still for a moment, awestruck. The pictures didn't do it justice. It was a large but quaint home located on a secluded island near Cape Cod, a small piece of land void of life, only the cottage and a lighthouse visible across the water, verified as an Airbnb Plus rental. 1 week's rent came to a little over $3,000. My publisher had been breathing down my neck for months, constantly asking for updates. Now I had the perfect environment to complete it. Upon opening the door, I was caught off guard. "Hello." I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a man inside, late 50s, average build, gray mustache. It took me a moment to match the face to the one on his Super Host profile. It was Garrett, the owner of the property. Sorry, Garrett, you startled me. I didn't expect anyone to be here. He smiled. I greet all my guests. You people are my livelihood, after all. Please, come in. We have some important matters to discuss. I joined him in the living room. We sat in armchairs on opposite sides of a long coffee table. Garrett simply continued to smile. So, what did you want to discuss? I asked. He pulled a folded sheet of paper out from his jacket and slid it across the coffee table. It stopped in front of me. I picked it up for a closer look. The edges were worn, and it felt almost canvas-like between my fingers. I began unfolding, but Garrett stopped me. Don't, you'll have plenty of time for that later. Just listen. I looked up at him, confused but compliant. This house has been in my family for generations. Staying here can be a rewarding experience, but it can also be a dreadful one if you're not careful. Come on, Garrett. Don't tell me the place is haunted. I was the only one smiling now. Garrett looked at me, thoroughly and amused. My smile vanished, and I gestured for him to continue. On that sheet of paper are some rules. You must follow every last one of them. There are no exceptions. So long as you do this, your vacation will be a pleasant one. With that, Garrett stood up from the chair and walked to the front door. He turned to me on his way out and offered a final sentiment before leaving. Follow the rules, Jack. If you don't, you're in for a bumpy ride. 1. No lights on past 11:25 p.m. 2. Do not answer your phone. Callers cannot be trusted. 3. Only two people are permitted inside. Hank Benston and Jessica Covenwood. Ask for last names. 4. Do not exit the house after midnight until sunrise. 5. If your room changes location, close the door and try again. Only leave when connection has been re-established. 6. The voices are harmless. Do not converse with them. 7. Never lock the doors. 8. If you have any trouble, call Jessica Covenwood at this number, ***0371. This is the only phone call you can trust. This lifeline may only be used once during your rental period. At the bottom of the page was a final note. I will come to collect you, but only when the rental period is over, not a moment sooner. There is no leaving until then. As I sat there mulling over the list, it all became clear. Garrett was a lunatic. Either that, or this was a poor attempt at humor. Either way, I brushed off our meeting and the list of rules altogether, placing the paper on the coffee table, where it stayed for the rest of the night. *****. A majority of the first night was peaceful, but my novel's final 6 chapters that needed completing, I was able to stay up late and finish 2 of them. After patting myself on the back for a job well done, I looked at my phone. It was 12:18 a.m. My lips spread into a slight smile as I looked at the desk light, wavering in and out of life. It's past 11:25. Garrett, was this why I needed to turn off the lights so they wouldn't flicker? I chuckled to myself as another rule came to mind. Number 4, if I remembered correctly. Do not exit the house after midnight. I continued to laugh to myself as I ventured downstairs, opened the front door, and stepped out into the night. The view was brilliant, a blanket of stars covering the cape, only broken up by the gorgeous lighthouse jutting upward, practically cutting a hole in the night sky. It was a breathtaking sight, well worth the partial advance for my book. What's the reasoning behind this rule, Garrett? You didn't want me to enjoy the view. I turned and stepped back into the house. I then locked the door. Oops, that's another rule broken. Hope the house doesn't chastise me. With that, I traveled upstairs to the bedroom and fell into a blissful sleep the moment my body met the sheets. My slumber would not last. 3:27 a.m. I awoke to a thunderous banging at the front door and a groggy slur of motion. My legs just barely managed to pull the rest of my body out of bed. Practically sleepwalking, I eventually made my way downstairs and opened the door outside. There were no longer any stars. Their light was replaced with a thick fog rolling over the ocean. The water and air were still, frozen in place. There was no one there but me. I closed the door and went back to bed, certain that the sounds I heard were remnants of a dream overlapping with waking life. My body fell onto the bed, and sleep took hold once more. 4:42 a.m. I awoke again, ripped from a dream state where I was turning in my novel to the publishing house. For whatever reason, in this dream, Garrett was my boss. He held the manuscript to my face and flipped the pages, revealing a lack of ink. "There's nothing here, Jack." All that time and nothing to show for it. He continued to flip through before stopping somewhere in the middle. Unlike the other pages, this one had text. The words were familiar, but they weren't written by me. Garrett's rules painted the page, the pitch-black ink slowly dripping from the paper. His form soon followed, melting onto the floor below. "You should have followed the rules, Jack." I had left the window open. It was just the wind, relieved. I shut the window and went back to sleep. 5:19 a.m. No sound woke me this time. Instead, it was nature calling, beckoning me to take a late-night trip to the bathroom. Unfortunately for me, this would not be an easy task. Upon opening the bedroom door, I was greeted by a deeply unsettling sight. It was a hallway, not the hall that should have been there. Mind you, an entirely different hallway, noticeably different. It was narrow, almost too thin for a person to walk through, and it was long, very long, seemingly longer than the building itself. Lining the sides was a plethora of doors, more doors than I knew the house to have. It was, by all means, unexplainable. I rubbed my eyes to test their acuity. The hallway was still there. I wondered for a moment if I was dreaming, but quickly discarded the notion, certain that I could tell the difference between what was real and what wasn't. But if not a dream, then what? With an air of hesitance about me, my feet pattered into the narrow void. I tried each door along the way, but they were all locked halfway in. A harrowing sound cut through the air. I turned my head to see that the bedroom door had shut itself. Running back and turning the knob was futile. It wouldn't budge. Without a whole lot of options, I continued down the hall. At the end was a final door, different than the rest. Affixed to it was a plaque with a designation, like one you might see in a hotel. According to the text, it was room 371. The knob offered no resistance as I turned it and gently pushed the door open. There was no light inside. Still, I could make out something standing in the center of the room, facing me. It was a shadowy figure, slightly darker than the blackness around it. A vague glow outlined its form. It was tall, taller than any man. I had the inclination to close the door and turn back, but fear kept me anchored in place. My breathing became erratic, and my heart rate soared to new heights as it took a step towards me. In a flash, it lunged to my position. Everything went black. asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Though it didn't sit well with me, it was the only explanation I had. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. I knew who it was, but with my deadline on the horizon, I couldn't afford the distraction. When the buzzing ceased, I crawled out of bed and started the day, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. My first few hours awake were productive. I was able to write over half of the next chapter and tweak some finer details throughout the rest of the book. My progress was, however, impeded by a knock at the front door. Unlike the night previous, there was someone out there, a man. "Can I help you?" I asked, confused. "Was hoping I could help you. Actually, the name's Hank. I'm a locksmith from the mainland. Garrett sent me to check the locks on all the doors." I pondered for a moment and then grabbed the list of rules from the coffee table. I looked it over before meeting Hank back at the door. "Well, it looks like you're on the list." "Splendid. May I come in then?" An unnaturally wide smile danced across his cheeks. "Yeah, sure, come in." Hank walked past the threshold and sighed. There was a long moment of silence before he spoke again. "What a lovely place. Can't wait to sink my teeth in and get to work." He then sauntered off upstairs. I sat down on the couch and continued writing, hoping my creative breakthrough hadn't subsided. An hour passed, and another. I was able to finish up some more work, but something kept scratching at the back of my mind. I knew locksmithing wasn't the loudest job out there, but I expected to hear at least some sort of tinkering coming from upstairs. The distant sound of keys scraping against the lock's inner chambers. But no, there was only silence. I then wondered why Hank was there to begin with. This was far from a typical rental experience, especially one on a secluded island. I skimmed the list again. Two things stood out. Rule number 7. Never lock the doors. "Hank," I yelled out, hoping to get his attention. There was no answer. "Hank, can you please come down here?" No response, only silence. This was my cue to investigate. To my dismay, the second floor was completely vacant. I scoured every room, every nook and cranny the house had to offer, to no avail. Hank was nowhere to be found. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. How could a person just up and vanish like that? I returned to the first floor. Hank was there, sitting on the couch, looking over my manuscript. There was no way he could have snuck by me. "Say, this is pretty good. I wonder how it's going to play out. Help me out here, Jack. Is there a happy ending, or does the man succumb to his own demons?" I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. "Hank," I asked, "what's your last name?" A grin formed beneath his nose. "Reedon. The name's Hank Reedon." "Why do you ask?" I looked down at the list in my hand. Penston. His name was supposed to be Hank Penston. "No reason, just curious. Hey, do you mind tossing me my phone?" Hank looked down at my phone on the coffee table. A few moments passed before he grabbed it and looked over at me. He stared for a long time, almost as if calculating the distance, and then, finally, threw it over. I caught it and ran for the front door. "Thanks. I'll be right back." I sprinted to the edge of the island, unsure of who or what that was inside the house. It was becoming ever apparent that Garrett might not be so crazy after all. Something truly strange was afoot, and I wanted no part of it. At first, I called the ferry station. No answer. Then Garrett. Still no answer. Before I could try another number, my ex-wife called. I had been ignoring her calls for weeks. "Charlotte. Thank God I'm at an Airbnb off the Cape. I need you too," she interjected. Leslie's dead, Jack." My blood ran cold. It was said with the same tone and resentment as it was 2 years before. All at once the floodgates opened, and a slew of memories poured in, ones I had tried desperately to repress. Leslie was our daughter. Before Charlotte and I divorced, she was struck by a car on her way home from school. Charlotte was at work, and I was supposed to pick Leslie up, but I was too wrapped up in my first novel. I forgot all about her, my own daughter. She walked a good mile before the collision. I never forgave myself. Neither did Charlotte. "Charlotte, why are you saying this?" Tears rolled down my face. "She's dead, Jack. It's your fault. My baby is dead, all because of you." Her voice became louder and less distinct until I could barely recognize the cadence, an inhuman growl. "You're to blame, Jack. You belong where you are. I hope you rot in that house." I looked down at the list, now stained with the steady stream of droplets dripping from my cheeks. And that's when I remembered rule number 2. Do not answer your phone. Callers cannot be trusted. As much as it pained me, I hung up on her. It wasn't real, but it sure as hell felt like it was. I wiped away my tears and looked at the last rule. Braving the fierce currents of the ocean likely wouldn't end well, the shore nearly 16 miles away, so Jessica was my only hope, the only phone call you can trust, according to Garrett. I dialed the number and waited. After 2 tones, my ear was met with a female voice. "You broke a rule, didn't you?" "A few, actually, give or take." She let out a sigh. "Did you let anyone in?" "Yes, Hank Penston." "No, Hank Reedon." There was another disappointed sigh. "Okay, listen carefully. I want you to go to the back of the house, but act natural. No sudden moves or conspicuous behavior. Any slight change in your attitude could set him off. Walk slow and be cautious." "Okay." I did as instructed. On my way round the house, I looked through the window. Hank was no longer in the living room. There was a slight spike in my adrenaline, but I held my composure until turning the corner. That is, standing at the back of the house, waiting for me, was Hank. "Hey there, Jack. What are you up to?" Jessica chimed in. "Stay calm and repeat what I say verbatim. Hank, I have Garrett on the phone. He wants to know if you can check the lock on the front door. He says it's been sticking lately." In the most casual voice I could muster, I repeated what Jessica said. Hank bore a stoic expression for a few moments and then spoke. "That darn thing. I'll see what I can do." He walked past me and went off to the front of the house. I was officially rattled. Jessica's voice broke the tension. "About a dozen yards from the house is an electrical box. Do you see it?" I surveyed the area and noticed the box. It was embedded in a tree stump, of all places, one that stuck out of the ground at an awkward angle. "Yes, I see it." "Good. Open the hatch. There is a lever there. I want you to pull it down and then wait exactly 10 seconds, after which you will place it back in its original position and close the hatch." I was confused. How is this going to help exactly? There was a third sigh of frustration. "That is the master switch. When you pull the lever, it will deactivate all energy on the island. When you reset the lever, the house will reconstitute. This will wipe the slate clean." I didn't understand how it all worked, but I had heard enough to warrant an obvious follow-up question. Couldn't I just leave it off? There was no sigh this time, just anger. "No, the island is far worse when the energies are at bay. 10 seconds is all you're allowed." At this point, I saw Hank walking alongside the house. "I fixed that lock for you, Jack." Jessica must have heard, because her voice adopted a tone of urgency. "Pull the lever, now." I did as she said and began counting. Hank continued to walk towards me, his form phasing in and out like a bad television signal. "Jack, what are you doing? Need a hand." His pace grew faster until his walk became a run. My heart was pounding just as he was closing in. The 10 seconds were up, and I forced the lever back. Hank vanished completely, and the stump receded into the earth below. I fell back onto the ground in relief. "Jessica, we did it, asterisk, click, asterisk." Clearly she wasn't as pleased with the victory as I was. That was fine. I was just thankful to be alive. Once inside the house, I laid down in bed and held the list to my face, scrutinizing every last detail. I was determined not to break another rule for the rest of my stay. That night was peaceful. I made sure all the doors were unlocked, turned off the lights by 11:25, and refused to answer any calls. When I slept, there were no strange dreams. No dreams at all. In fact, it was a truly restful night. The best sleep I'd had in years. Despite my predicament, I awoke hopeful. Hopeful that I could weather the storm and survive the week. I was even able to write some more of my book. Not much, but enough to jumpstart my creativity. The next night didn't go nearly as well. To 12 a.m. I had woken without cause. In an effort to fall back asleep, I shut my eyes and allowed my mind to wander. I thought of my book and the deadline. I thought of my eventual departure from the island. Before long, I thought of Charlotte and Leslie. The image of our once happy family would forever be seared into my broken heart. I felt my eyes begin to water, but something interrupted the sadness. A sound, footsteps. My eyes opened and I sprang to life, sitting upright in bed. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. With a great deal of apprehension, I got out of bed, took a deep breath, and tiptoed to the door. When I turned the knob and opened it, I found myself at the entrance of the house. With rule number 5 in mind, I shut the door and opened it again. I was now at the living room. Next was the bathroom, then a hallway, a familiar hallway. Off in the distance, I heard the click of room 371's door. The tall shadow stepped out. The hall began to shrink. The figure closed the gap between us in a matter of seconds. Luckily, my will to live outweighed the fear that held me in place. I managed to shut the door just in time to prevent my demise. When I opened it again, the room was back where it was supposed to be. 3:47 a.m. Just as I was finally drifting back to sleep, the voices started. "Hey, Jack, enjoying your stay?" Though frightened, rule number 6 came to mind and I followed it. The voices were harmless, and I was not to converse with them. "What's wrong, Jack?" Hung up on Garrett's rules. That's no fun. I closed my eyes as the voice grew louder and hid beneath the covers. "Don't hide, Jack. We won't hurt you. Honest." The footsteps were back. Walking outside the room, they stopped at the door. "He's here now, Jack. I can tell you how to make him go away, but you have to talk to me." The door creaked open, and the footsteps recommenced, walking over to the side of the bed. "He's leaning over you now. I can make him leave. Just say the word." I couldn't give in to the ploy. I had to obey the rules. But then there was a tug on the sheets. My heart nearly stopped. "Wake up, Jack." I jolted to a sitting position. The room was empty, and the door shut. It was a dream, but that didn't explain the hand-shaped impression on the edge of the bed. No matter the culprit, I would endure the torment. It was only a week. You can get through this, Jack. Leslie's face flashed in my mind and forced an unexpected tear out. You've been through so much worse. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next few nights came and went without issue. There were some dicey moments, but I learned to handle the odd voice here and there and the room moving every now and again. I ignored knocks at the front door altogether, avoiding any and all potential repeats of the Hanky incident. Night 6, however, was by far the worst. Some things never change. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Dark clouds loom over the ocean as waves crashed into the island. Just like the night Leslie was killed, I became deeply engrossed in my writing, to the point that nothing in the world could have pulled me away. Even after everything that had happened in the house, I was somehow able to finish the book. Maybe the shock to my system inspired me. My fear had transformed into focus, granting me a greater mental clarity. When all was said and done, and the editing complete, there was a horrible revelation. According to my phone, it was 11:24 p.m. My heart sank to the depths of my soul as I raced across the house, shutting lights off, knocking over furniture and decorations in the process. When I came back to the bedroom to turn off the final light at the desk, I glanced at my phone once more. The readout is now etched into my memory. 11:26 p.m. I clicked off the light, praying that my phone's readout was somehow wrong and that I still had time. 11:27 p.m. The bedroom door slammed itself shut behind me. I jostled the knob and pushed my weight against it, but it remained unmoved. A swirling, black vortex of smoke was expelled from beneath the bed. It covered the floor in an instant and began rising to fill the rest of the room. I had no intention of waiting to see what would happen to me in the darkness. So I flung myself at the window and shattered the glass, landing on my back in a bed of shrubbery below. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Shortly thereafter, I passed out. 11:38 p.m. I dreamt. I know it was a dream and not the house's doing because it was one I'd had many times before. The setting, my daughter's school. The bell rang and a stampede of children rushed out into the world, excited to leave for the day and see their parents. The last person out was Leslie, left alone to her own devices. "Daddy, where are you?" Her eyes darted back and forth. I tried to call out to her, but much like the day in question, I wasn't there. In the dream, I was only an observer, forced to watch as the horror unfolded before me. Leslie waited for 15 long minutes before heading off in the direction of our home. I bore witness to her trek, a poor girl alone in the cold, and then it happened. Dream tears flooded my field of view as a car swerved, and the heart-wrenching scream of that beautiful young girl rang through the winter air. 11:56 p.m. I woke up on the ground, covered in tears and broken glass. The ocean waves crashed against the walls of the house. There was no time to waste without my phone. I didn't know exactly what time it was, but it had to be close to midnight. Another broken rule would only make matters worse. I raced to the front door, opened it, and swiftly shut it behind me, somewhat thankful to be back in the house, but also somewhat terrified. The coming moments would echo the latter emotion, adding to my woes. 12:05 a.m. I was able to open the bedroom door and retrieve my phone, Luckily, the smoke had vanished. Upon venturing back down to the living room, I was shattered, just like the glass on the ground outside. There, sitting on the couch where Hank sat before her, was Leslie, my Leslie. I reached the bottom step and nearly fell to my knees, almost forgetting to breathe in the process. She was the same, exactly the same, every feature identical to the day I last saw her. How was this possible? Hi, Daddy. Her voice pulled a wave of emotion out of me, stronger than anything I had ever felt before. Was it really her? Was this really my precious Leslie, brought back to life? Surely this wasn't the house's doing. Was it? Sweetheart, is that you? Is it really you? She looked over at me with innocent eyes. Yes, Daddy, it's me. I ran over to her and took her in my arms, my face now drenched in an ocean of tears. Oh, Leslie, sweetheart, I missed you so much. I pulled away to get a better look at her. That's when I saw it. For an instant, in between blinks, her eyes were solid pools of black. This was not my Leslie. I backed away at once. What's wrong, Daddy? I continued my retreat to the stairs. You're not real. This isn't real. We buried you. Her next words stopped me in my tracks. No, Daddy, you buried me. Her eyes locked with mine as I cried. You killed me. You're the reason I'm dead. I took a pained breath before responding. You're right. I was a terrible father, and I deserve every moment of torture this house puts me through. If I ever get out of here, I'm going to visit your grave for the first time and tell you how sorry I am and how much I've missed you over the years. Not a day goes by that the guilt doesn't eat me up inside. I swallowed the lump in my throat and wiped away the tears as she looked up at me, her head tilted in observation. But you're not her. I ran up those stairs as fast as I could. Leslie's piercing screams echoed through the house, followed by the sound of every window breaking in reaction to the pitch. Once in the bedroom, I closed the door behind me and slid down into a sitting position on the floor against it, utterly defeated and emotionally drained. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jessica's number. After 2 tones, she picked up. What is it this time? Don't tell me you broke another rule. I think I'm going to die tonight, Jessica. Her perturbed tone vanished, replaced with concern. Jack, what did you do? What's going on over there? I can't fight it anymore. It's too much. As much as I wanted to live, I could feel myself giving up. I don't even know why I called her. She couldn't help. The lever was gone, and it was past midnight. The storm outside was destroying the house. Soon, I would be swept out to sea, never to be heard from again. Hold on, Jack. I'll be there soon. Click. She wouldn't be coming. Even if the ferries ran that late, they wouldn't dare operate in a storm that violent. The end was near, and I could feel it. 1:13 a.m. After a good long while of wallowing in self-pity, there was a knock at the front door. Jessica. No, it couldn't be. I cautiously exited the bedroom and slowly descended the staircase to the living room below. The storm raged on outside, a gust of wind howling through the house, and reaching the bottom step, I noticed that the coast was clear. Leslie's ghost was nowhere in sight. As quickly as I could without drawing any unwanted attention to myself, I pattered over to the door and opened it. Behind it was a beautiful woman in her 30s, black hair, peach skin, and a tasteful spattering of freckles on either side of her nose. Jessica, I asked. Who else would it? Her voice and sassy attitude answered my question in spades. I stepped aside and she barged in, clearly upset. I closed the door behind her, careful not to lock it and risk breaking another rule. I was less scared of the supernatural consequences than I was of Jessica's fury. You really had me worried, Jack. What did you do, anyway? Before I could answer, a small figure appeared from behind the couch. It was Leslie. Jessica followed my gaze and looked across the room. Jack, who's that? Mid-utter. I didn't know she was here with you. You don't understand. My daughter has been dead for 2 years. Jessica backed up to the door where I was still standing. Oh, I see, just as before. Leslie let out an awful shriek that rang through the house. It was louder than before, much louder. Jessica turned to me, our hands cupping our ears. Jack, we need to get out of here. Follow 'em. Wear us past Leslie and up the stairs to the bedroom. Okay, Jack, let's get going. She shut the door and opened it. She continued this routine, revealing the many rooms of the house. At one point it opened up into the living room. Jessica quickly slammed it shut before Leslie could make her way in to get us. Finally, it opened up into the hallway. Yes, that hallway. Jessica grabbed my wrist. Come on, let's go. I yanked my arm back in refusal. Are you insane? I've been in there and I don't plan on going back. Have you seen room 371? Jessica let out one of her signature sighs. Yes, I know all about it. So long as we get to where we're going before the shadow notices, we'll be fine. Now, come on. We don't have a whole lot of time here. I reluctantly respected her wishes. I wasn't keen on facing that ominous stretch of hall again, but Jessica's advice hadn't failed me yet. Besides, I was ready to die just an hour ago. Whatever fate would befall me, and there couldn't be any worse than seeing my dead daughter resurrected. Okay, Jessica, I'm ready. 1:36 a.m. Matching each other's pace, step for step, we disappeared into the dark hallway, the bedroom door closing behind us. I whispered, so as not to wake the beast. Where are we going? Anyway, none of the doors down here open. Without hesitation, she answered, one does. It took a moment for it to sink in. No, Jessica, are you serious? I can't go in that room. It lives in there. She turned to me and put her hands on either side of my face. She stared into my eyes with a look of pure kindness. I was taken aback by the unexpected intimacy. Jack, you need to calm down. Just trust me. We are going to be fine. I promise. As far as explanations go, that was pretty vague. Still, it was reassuring. I can't explain it, but I was compelled to believe her. There was something about Jessica I really liked, a warmth that radiated around her, a contagious, soothing force. We continued down the hall, and I didn't bring up my reservations again. 1:42 a.m. We reached the door. This was it, the moment of truth. I was about to open it when Jessica pulled my hand back. In order for this to work, you need to knock 3 times. No more and no less. I nodded in agreement. I raised my hand to the wood and knocked precisely 3 times. A deep anxiety racked my nerves as the anticipation grew. After a few moments, the door was pulled open, revealing the shadowy figure within. It stepped away and motioned for us to enter. I looked over to Jessica for approval. She nodded and followed me in. The entity softly closed the door behind us. It then walked over to where we stood and changed. His dark form turned to light, illuminating the rest of the room. It was the bedroom, only it wasn't exactly the same. Something was amiss. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It just felt different. The bright figure then shrunk down to a glowing orb and drifted away, phasing through one of the walls, leaving us by ourselves. Moonlight shone through the window. The glass wasn't broken anymore. There was no storm outside. Everything was pristine. Jessica, what just happened? This is the house's safe space, a fail-safe for when too many rules are broken. She could tell I wasn't following. It's a copy of the bedroom from just before things went south, a moment suspended in time that we can stay in for a while. At dawn, everything will revert to normal. Why didn't you tell me about it before? Honestly, it's a risky move. The shadow is a fickle being. When you enter room 371, there's only a 50% chance he'll accept your entrance. Otherwise, you're doomed. I couldn't believe it. You're telling me we could have died. You risked our lives on a 50% chance. She came over and placed her hands on my face again. Jack, we're safe. There's no need to be angry. Relax. We would have died anyway at the hands of the house. This was our only option. She was right. Honestly, I was happy she was there. Without her, I would have been a goner. 3:17 a.m. Jessica spent some time going over my manuscript. I filled in some of the blanks so she could skip the more fatty sections and finish before bed. Jack, this is beautiful. I wasn't so sure. Maybe I put too much of myself in it. Maybe the blood I poured onto the pages covered up the meaning. Who in their right mind would want to swim through my despair to reach a story even I wasn't sure I believed in? It's about you, isn't it, Jack? This is your life from the moment your daughter died to now. I felt myself unraveling. I'm tired, Jessica. I think I'm going to call it a night. I offered her a half-smile, waltzed over to the bed, and laid down. To my surprise, she laid down with me and placed her hand on my chest. It's okay, Jack. I've never lost a child, so I can't imagine the kind of things you're dealing with. I do know that things will never be same. That doesn't mean you have to give up. What would your daughter have wanted? There was no fighting the tears any longer. You don't understand, Jessica. I'm responsible. She was waiting for me when it happened. I was her father, and I wasn't there for her when she needed me. Jessica didn't respond. I sobbed until there was nothing left in me. When the moment passed, I asked her a question. Why do these things happen here? Honestly, I don't really know. We turned to each other. Her warmth reared its head again, inviting me to come to it. Our lips met, and with it, an intense feeling was born. Like nothing I had ever felt, a somber, quiet energy filled the air and coated the room. In a turn of events I will never fully fathom, Jessica and I made love. 5:32 a.m. Jessica fell asleep in my arms. I stayed awake, content for the first time in years. Then a familiar, disembodied voice burrowed into my ear and poisoned my mind. What you're feeling isn't real. By this point I was all too familiar with the voices and their antics. I ignored its statement. She does this to every tenant. She's a seductress. I was tempted to reply, but conversing was forbidden. I couldn't afford a broken rule this close to the finish line. Only 2 people are allowed in. Jack, 2. It's a simple rule. What did that have to do with anything? What was the voice up to? Jessica was one of the 2. Despite my unrest, I continued to bite my tongue, always ask for last names. There was a moment of pause before the realization washed over me. I gasped. A rule had indeed been broken. I jumped and backed into the corner of the room. Jessica was standing next to the bed. I hadn't even seen her get up. Jack, Are you okay? My breathing became labored. It was hard to construct my query in a normal fashion. Jessica, are you really you? Was this? What is your last name? The light left her face. Her now-empty eyes cut right through me. I slid to the floor. A long period of silence passed before anything changed, before she changed. 5:51 a.m. Jessica's face widened. Her eyes became large, as if physically engorged with bloodlust. She lunged at me. I dodged the attack and hit the door hard. I reached for the knob, but it wouldn't turn. Jessica's new form spoke. A gurgling, metallic sound that ricocheted off the walls. It looks like you're stuck with me, Jack. She lunged again. I slid under the bed to escape her reach. Her feet paced around its perimeter. A predator circling its prey. It was just a matter of time now. I closed my eyes and thought of Charlotte and Leslie playing in the snow. The last day I saw them together. This would be my final thought as death approached. As beautiful a thought as one could have before dying. At least now I could be with her again. A pained outcry from Jessica broke my concentration. The light in the room had changed. I rolled out from underneath the bed and saw her writhing in the corner. The sun was coming up over the horizon outside. This was my chance. I raced over to Jessica and clenched her neck. She struggled, but was too weak to break free. I forced her against the window. Her skin melted, dripping like candle wax to the floor. Her hair burned to a crisp. I looked to her eyes for even a shred of humanity, something that might convince me to spare her for all she had meant to me. There was none, only malice. In that moment I sincerely wished that she had been real. Goodbye, Jessica, ... With as much force as I could muster, I pushed her through the window. Her form disintegrated before it could reach the ground. The wind carried her ashes away into the endless expanse of the ocean. She was no more. The house was still. Hours passed. As my rental period came to a close, I sat in the living room and reflected on the events of the week. In a weird way, I had come to terms with Leslie's death. The guilt would always be there, but I felt I could move on now, free of the restraints that once bound me. Knock, knock. I opened the door and let Garrett in. Your ferry awaits. I nodded and gathered my things. I was anxious to leave, but felt the need to ask him something first. Garrett, what is this place? He smirked. Many words come to mind. Anomaly, portal, impossibility. I personally think it's a mirror, showing us ourselves in a way we never thought possible. A place where our past and present intersect. Perhaps the right word for it is closure. I smiled. You might be onto something, Garrett. Splendid. Does that mean you'll leave a good review? I chuckled. You know what? I'll do it right now. I opened the app and clicked through to the listing. A bit of information caught my eye as I scrolled. Checkout time, 12 p.m. I looked up at the readout at the top of my phone's display. It turned to from 11:59 to 12 o'clock as I watched. I let someone in before time was up, meaning a rule had been broken. The note at the end of the list came to mind as the dread set in. I will come to collect you, but only when the rental period is over. Not a moment sooner. That wasn't Garrett. I looked up to see him standing directly in front of me. Something wrong, Jack? I dropped my things and ran out to the dock as fast as I could. The ferry had just arrived, the real Garrett aboard, motioning for me to hurry. After boarding, I turned back and looked at the house one last time.